Welcome everybody. This is the 5th webinar of the Just for All webinars and Massive Open Online course. And it is also the first one in 2025. So thank you so much for being here and for following through. I know it's been quite a lot, but hopefully the journey is still quite interesting. And speaking about interesting things, today we have a really full program with 3 amazing speakers that I will introduce later on more fully. But in your screens, you can see already Amy, Almudena, and Paul. So hello, everybody, and really happy to have you here joining us. I'm sure we're going to have some excellent discussions in the minutes to come. So before that, and as per usual, I'm Angeliki Giannakopoulou. I work at the EAA as a policy and projects coordinator. So I will be coordinating and facilitating, moderating, if you wish, today's webinar. So what we will do, we will start with an introduction based on the introductory presentation of the subject of today's webinar from our Moodle, and then we will go on with the questions. So what is the subject today? The subject of the day is competencies for the future in the just transition. So I know that for the New Year's resolution, maybe it's really fitting that that we start with this, and maybe we can inspire some further learning opportunities for everyone. So with that, I will start by sharing my screen and starting with our introductory presentation. So let's see if that's visible. It seems to be. So yeah, so as we said, today's topic is just transition and competencies for the future. This is part, of course, of the Just for All MOOC. It's a course consisting of 8 modules. We say that approximately it takes 2 weeks to finish each of the modules, but this has to do because we have a lot of materials and a lot of nice resources. Do not expect that we're really rigid about it. Of course, at the end, and if you follow our webinars, either face-to-face or by visiting our Moodle, 1 week after each webinar, you can also find the actual recording online there as well. You can have an open badge if you follow only one of the courses, or a full-on certificate if you complete the entire course. So we've already been through 4 other modules and 4 other webinars. We've introduced lifelong learning and adult learning and education for the just transition. We've talked about social innovation. We've discussed empowering and engaging vulnerable groups, and of course, grassroots initiatives and community learning, that these two really go well together. And today we are discussing competencies for the future, leaning towards awareness-raising actions and campaigns for citizenship, for citizens and consumers, strategic partnerships for the just transition, and gamification and other innovative methods to promote the just transition. So we have some things still going on in the next few weeks. Next webinar on the 27th of January, the one after on the 19th of February, and so on. So really hope we will see you there as well. So what does a just future look like? Well, we've already discussed how this concept of the just transition has been around for quite many years. It's been around definitely from the 70s, coming from the workers' movement, but it has begun to grow more and more, especially in the later years, and it has touched majorly the field of education. So while it is something old, it has currently assumed new connotations, especially in the last decade. So this increased significance, of course, is connected with societal changes. It is connected with the digital transformation. We will talk about the twin transition as well today, not only a just transition or a sustainable transition, because there is this element of digitalization included. But we, of course, when talking about a transition, we cannot have a look at what is happening on the climate change front and other environmental issues, as well as increased pace of changes in the field of education and employment, most lately war as well. So it always stands in the back of our head. In that, and to put a little bit of context in the choices of competencies that we will be showcasing today, but more also in our course on our Moodle, I see that someone uh, has opened the annotation. Don't worry. I think that yeah, we can erase that. Lovely. So we have the UN Sustainable Development Goals that set the tone as they have been adopted by all United Nations member states in 2015, and they provide a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity, and of course, sustainability. This is why we call them the Sustainable Development Goals. At its heart, there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which are an urgent call for action by all countries developed and developing in global partnership. So you will see here that we have highlighted 4 of them: no poverty, quality education, decent work and economic growth, and reduced inequalities, as we find that these SDGs in particular are very relevant to a just transition, both on the element of justice as well as the element of sustainability and transition. Another very important document that we have and we're visiting and revisiting in this course, but not only, is the European Union Green Deal. And indeed, this comes from our little, small world in the European Union, without disregarding what happens outside of the EU, especially keeping in mind that still in the EU we have major colonial interests outside of the EU. So, of course, at all times we take a critical lens in seeing what affects the EU, but also how EU affects the rest of the world. But the European Green Deal is a package of policy initiatives that aim to create a path towards the green transition and reaching climate neutrality by 2050. Let's see how that will go. It does support the transformation of the EU towards a more fair and prosperous society, at least in terms of suggestions and recommendations, and it underlines the need for a holistic cross-sectoral approach in which all relevant policy areas contribute to the ultimate climate-related goal, that is climate neutrality. But talking about what is already happening, and on this, we link to our third webinar, which you can find in our Moodle and in our YouTube channels. We talk about another growth, or happy degrowth, or well-being economy that is possible, and for a need in this future of ours to redefine the concept of growth and of its principles, and start moving away of this idea of progress and well-being as it's linked to increased financial or material resources. Because of course this also affects the way that we perceive sustainability and we perceive this green or greener future. So we say that the case is not keep on consuming as much as we are, keep on having as much material resources as we have, but maybe also redefine and reconsider that. So the conviction that you see here in degrowth or well-being economy as well is that true progress in sustainable policies demands a bold reimagining of economic principles. Prosperity should be measured not by material excess, but by the quality of life it offers within planetary boundaries to everybody that lives in our planet, and not into our microsphere. So degrowth and the alternative economies movements are part of what we call the transition movements. And the just transition or the community-led transition or the inner transitions are all movements of communities that focus on imagining a different world and carrying out actions to build it together. Um, either by working for a low carbon, socially just future and more resilient communities, or by operating at an individual, group, and movement level, aiming for changes that we need to make ourselves to transition to more caring, equitable, beautiful, sustainable, and resilient worlds our hearts are longing for. And this, as said, needs both the individual but very, very importantly, the collective sentiment to be engaged. So for all of this, what do we mean in this webinar when we will discuss competencies? So there are many definitions of a competence, and I know that it's a word that in for non-native speakers, it can mean different things in different contexts. I come from Greece and I know that it's always a task to try to differentiate in the Greek language skills from competencies and what that means for different people. It does seem to be quite a technical word, but for us, we're talking about a complex system that refers to knowledge, skills, personal and professional experiences, attitudes, perceptions, and self-awareness regarding a topic. And in this case, for us, the definition of a competence can be defined as broader attributes that refer to an ability to use said knowledge, skills, social or methodological abilities in your work or study situations, in professional and personal development. And at all times, it's not limited to the cognitive area, but it also encompasses functional, technical areas, interpersonal skills, and values. So you will see that we're going to have quite a broad sentiment around it. And to engage and to inform this sentiment around competencies, we have a series of competence frameworks. We have the EU frameworks, Green Comp, Deeds Comp, Entry Comp, and Life Comp. I think that these are the four more relevant and more well-known ones. Green Comp, of course, discuss sustainability competencies. Deeds Comp, digital competencies. Entry Comp, entrepreneurship competence. And Life Comp, personal, social, and learning to learn key competencies. Other institutional approaches refer to the reference framework of competencies for democratic culture from the Council of Europe and the Digital Citizenship Education Handbook as well by the Council. We also have the UNESCO recommendations on global citizenship education that really relate to competencies and future aspects. And from other sectors, we have protocols for assessment of intercultural competencies. We have from the European trade unions, green competencies for trade unionists, a case-based approach. And we have, as a good example, the work done in the Transvaal EU project about transversal competencies and the creation of a framework discussing that. And we closed with Transvaal EU because everybody agrees all of these frameworks agree that transversal competencies are most probably the key to this future idea of what competencies will look like for all of us. So what are these transversal competencies? They are competencies that are learned and proven abilities, which are commonly seen as necessary or valuable for effective action in virtually any kind of work, learning, or life activity. They are transversal because they're not exclusively related to any particular context, but they encompass a broader notion of life, having job, occupation, academic, discipline, civic or community engagement, and so on. So all of this you can, of course, find in our Moodle. I'm not going to stand too much into it. We are going to share in the chat the relevant links very, very soon. So which ones of those have we identified before we get into our discussions? We have personal, social, and learning to learn. We have critical thinking, problem solving, conflict resilience and transformation, ethics and responsibility, and sociological and ecological imagination. I know they sound quite broad and they sound quite big, but we are trying to maybe clarify what we mean by each one of them in the rest of this MOOC, and hopefully they will be clarified if you follow the full course. So to really help us understand how movements and how actual activities have been shared to promote these competencies, we have already collected a series of about 50 successful Just Transition initiatives that you can find online. We will share that in the chat as well. And of course, all of this is available in our platform. You can enroll by going at learning.eaa.org and then enrolling at the Just for All MOOC, which you will find in the homepage. But you can also, of course, visit this QR code, follow this QR code, and visit our MOOC. You can see, hopefully you can see, that it's we have quite a lot of things to discuss, and that goes for each one of our modules. So hopefully you will get quite engaged. But with this, I am going to pass the baton, I guess, to the next people that so graciously are here with us, and we're very honored and very happy to have them with us. We have Amy Skinner, a researcher in the field of global citizenship, education, and international development; Paul Crew, EU and Special Project Officer at Development Perspectives; and Almudena Munoz-Putze, project coordinator of the new EcoSmart project that will share with us quite a lot of initiatives and quite a lot of insights for us today. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen in hopes to see more of you more clearly. That was with the introduction. I didn't see any questions in the chat, but of course, everyone, if you wish to add your insights or ask any questions in the chat, you're more than welcome to do so. We actually very much wanted, as this series of webinars and this MOOC is supposed to be very community oriented and action oriented. So the more input we have from your part, the better. And with that, I guess I can introduce more properly our first speaker, and that is Amy. So Amy, as I said, is a freelance research and evaluator in the field of global citizenship, education, and international developments. She has over 15 years of experience working with local, European, and international NGOs, focusing on project development and management, research and monitoring, and evaluation. And evaluation is going to be a big part of your talk today. She has recently supported an international NGO network in developing their own monitoring, evaluation, and learning framework, and has co-edited a book published by Routledge called Education, Learning, and the Transformation of Development. So thank you so much, Amy, for being with us today. It's really great pleasure, and I'm going to start a bit with a question. So, are competencies for the future just about individual learners, or also about societal and organizational capabilities? And if you could share some insights on how also organizations or systems can evaluate and cultivate these competencies, it would be great for us. So take it along.
Okay, thank you, Angeliki. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, so I think that, in terms of the just transition, obviously, developing competencies in individual learners is extremely important. But individuals are not an island, they're part of a kind of collective or an organizational setup, an organizational structure. And this broader context or organizational setting can really have a profound influence on the extent to which individuals are able to not only just develop the skills and the competencies, but also to put them into practice. in their daily work, if it's in a professional context, or within their learning, if it's in a more educational setting. So I think, it's good if competencies can be reinforced on multiple levels. And if individuals are able to see the competencies that they're developing being reflected in the values and practices, for example, of their workplace or their place of learning. So yeah, I really think that it's important that we look at this with a multi-level approach, where individual and collective competencies really reinforce each other. And I think when we talk about transitions, we often tend to focus on the external transition, on the changes that we want to see externally in the world, the changes that we want to contribute out there in the wider world. But sometimes we tend to forget about the internal transition that can accompany that. So, the kind of idea of change starting with us, or being the change that you want to see in the world. So I think it's important that we take that, we kind of take a little bit of distance and we look at ourselves as an organization, how we're functioning, look at the values and the practices that we are embodying, and does that reflect what we want to see in the outer world? And I think it's really, this sense of are we practicing what we're preaching? Are we walking the talk? Are we leading by example? And sometimes there can be a gap here between what organizations are preaching and what they're actually practicing internally. And I think this is where competencies come in. I think we can really help to bridge this gap between, the internal and external change, or between values and actions, through competencies. Competencies really help to translate these values into actions, and help us to better walk the talk, or practice what we preach. And I think they can also serve as a kind of reality check. What we are saying we want to see in society or from governments, can we do that ourselves internally? So if we're looking to reduce carbon emissions, or we want to have inclusive decision-making processes, can we do that ourselves? To what extent are we able to? Where are the challenges? And I think it's kind of testing it, on this micro level, is very helpful in saying, okay, can we actually live what we're claiming everybody should be doing? So it's really about how we can all become more effective agents of change, working together. And this might sound quite abstract. So maybe if I give a concrete example of a global education project that I was involved in, and this was we set ourselves, we were a project, and we set ourselves up as basically instead of seeing education as a service that we wanted to provide to learners to help them develop certain skills or attitudes or values, competencies, we looked at how we can apply those competencies that we want to develop in learners, how that we can apply them to ourselves as a collective, and stimulate critical reflection on the values and the principles, or the ambitions and the practices underpinning our work. So the way we did this is we really set ourselves up as a collective, not just of practitioners, but as learners ourselves. So we had a very strong learning element in the project. We organized we had very regular team meetings, reflection sessions, retreats, which really allowed us to constantly take stock, to constantly reflect on what we're doing, and to co-shape our work. Instead of having an end evaluation at the end of the project, we had an ongoing evaluation process whereby we had a critical friend who was working with us throughout the project and kind of constantly challenging us on our assumptions, challenging us on any particular blind spots there might be. So there was this constant, reflective learning process going on. We also looked at the way we were doing our advocacy work. So we tried to challenge the idea of, trying to have incremental change within a given paradigm, but actually to see how we could actually challenge this paradigm ourselves. So, for example, the growth paradigm or the North-South development paradigm. How can we perhaps do things differently so we're challenging more at a systemic level rather than just trying to have small changes within a paradigm that already exists? Same with communication, looking at whose voices were being represented, whose were perhaps missing. And then also in terms of very concrete policies, so procurement, when we were catering and holding events, were we sourcing products locally, sustainably farmed products, organic products. Also in terms of travel policies, we looked at how we could limit the emissions. HR policies as well, we really focused on well-being. Most of us were working 50 to 85%, so kind of trying to maintain that balance between work and life balance. And also kind of policies HR policies which followed a logic of empowerment rather than traditional line management. So within our setup, we were trying to kind of challenge, traditional power structures, or make sure that it was really inclusive and everybody was involved in shaping their own work, and also what success looked like in that work. And I think overall, what was most important is that we just saw ourselves kind of as experimenting, as an experiment, and that's really important when we're working towards the just transition, because none of us really know the answers. We're all trying and experimenting with different ideas. And for example, we held a conference on exactly this: how we can best, how we can best work towards a more sustainable and equitable world. And at the end of this conference, instead of producing like a standard declaration, which is usually the outcome of a conference, we produced a compass instead, which was kind of questions that we wanted to pose to ourselves and the world, which was about recognizing our humility, that we don't have the answers, but we have more questions, and that we need to find new ways to express our policies and our politics, really. So that's a very concrete example, I think, of how we can reflect on this at organizational level. How you could actually build this into your organizations, I would say the main question is to look at the strategies that you have, and then look at which practices or policies you feel you need to put in place internally, so that you can actually support this external agenda for change. So, identify what the unique values and approaches are that define your organization or your network and guide your work collectively, and then look at how you can align values with those objectives. So how a value-driven approach can support and enhance the achievement of your objectives. And then once you've got that, then break that down into, okay, which practices can we put into place which embody those values and help us achieve our objective at the broader level. And I think what's important is looking at, very much often we tend to look at the results and the outcomes we want to see, but it's very important also to look at the process, and how you're doing what you're doing, not just which activities you're going to implement to achieve certain goals, but how you're going to do that, what your approach is going to be. I think that this can be done. I mean, I worked with an international development network who also were working on a range of different issues related to sustainability, and they had different objectives, and we really kind of tried to pull everything together and say, okay, what is it about us as a network that brings these issues together, and how can we best make sure the network is thriving and functioning optimally so we can really contribute to these broader objectives we want to achieve. And we came up with a set of 6 practices, and some of these were very concrete about gender representation or environmental footprint policies, but others were more process related, so about how can we make sure we take time for reflection and learning, how can we nurture a culture of care and well-being within our organization, ensure inclusive decision making, and this was done as a collective. And then in order to, once we defined those practices, we then looked at how we can monitor and evaluate them, and that was also done collectively. So we developed a framework which was kind of tailor-made, which I think is very important, rather than trying to use standardized evaluation frameworks. And we used tools that also reflected the competencies we wanted to develop. So we used a lot of journals and self-reflective journaling, and the team would come together once or twice a year to actually go through and implement this journal together, where they would reflect on the practices of the last half year, how they're doing, how they can be improved, how they can be better integrated into practice. So I think, yeah, in terms of monitoring and evaluation of competencies, either at individual or organizational level, it's very important that it's developed collectively, it's participatory, that also process is looked at as well as outcomes. So in terms of education, it's about, not just what's being learned, but how, and does the learning or teaching process embody these values and skills that it wants to develop in learners. And I think also importantly is to how we understand monitoring and evaluation, and that it should be seen as a kind of reflective learning process and about experimentation, not a kind of scorecard or judgment process about whether you're being successful or whether you're failing, but it's really all about learning. And how we can adapt and better, how we can adapt as we go along. And I think that's very important. And also one other element in terms of indicators, I would say what I found useful in the past is to, rather than using static indicators, to perhaps develop some kind of progress markers. Because the development of a competency, whether it's at individual or organizational level, it's not something that happens overnight. It's a continuum. It's something that starts off with perhaps a basic understanding and awareness, which and then deepens with time. And I think that this idea of looking at progress rather than just a specific outcome can be very helpful, because you can also see where the sticking points are, where it's perhaps difficult to further a competence and why, and then and adapt to that. Yeah, I think this idea of progress markers rather than static indicators is helpful. And then in terms of concrete tools for evaluating, I would say that they also should reflect in a way the process of developing competencies. So dialogue-based, participatory, so peer assessments, self-reflection, self-assessments. Narratives can be useful, storytelling work, collective sense-making, dialogue-based assessment, these kind of ways of evaluating and monitoring, I think can be very helpful.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Amy. I'm sure we'll have more questions going forward, but it's very important to keep in mind that what you said about evaluation or monitoring not being like a school card that you did well, you did not do well, and there is only like these two options, and it's not about the progress, but it's more about the progress and the process of wanting to change than where you're standing at this point at this given time. And I'm reminded of a project that we're running at the AA, the SMALE project, where we have this matrix on evaluating the organization's green competencies, and it's all about, okay, you were standing here and now you are standing here, and that's good enough, because you can see that you've made progress. If you're not like at the end of the road, it doesn't mean that you're not achieving some things, because exactly of what you said, we cannot be aware of the contexts of everybody to just create a Kantian list of rules that this is bad, this is good, because we've seen that it doesn't work that way. And we will talk more about all that you said about the systemic element of it and the collective element of assessing these competencies, and even getting into this evaluation mindset before even starting acquiring some competencies, in order for you to be able to perceive this concept of progress and of process while you're into this acquisition, let's say, process yourself. With that, and because I know that we will have a lot of comments on it, again, coming from a global citizenship perspective, I am going to pass the floor to Paul. And Paul is joining us, as mentioned, by the development perspectives. He has been involved with the organization since 2013 and currently works as the EU and Special Project Officer. He holds a BA in Community Sports Leadership and has been heavily involved in coordinating projects in the area of migration and integration. Paul also coordinates EU-funded projects which explore global citizenship education through a wide variety of tools and processes, and he has 9 years of experience facilitating within the adult and community sector. Thank you so much for being here, Paul. And your question goes very well with what already Amy said from a global citizenship lens. And of course, through your work in the development perspectives, but also commenting on Amy's words, if you wish, I would like to know, what do you see as the most pressing competencies that our societies need to develop to navigate these challenges, and how do you see them maybe linking and or even fostered at the individual and organizational and systemic level?
Thank you very much, Angeliki, and hello to everyone. Great to see so many people here on a Friday morning in the middle of January. So yeah, no, I think there's a lot to touch on, even dovetailing off what Amy said. I suppose I'm coming at it from a purely practice-based experience myself. So I'll speak a little bit from that experience, looking at, global citizenship education. I think it connects a lot with just transition movements for many reasons. And then I'll maybe get into more kind of specific skills that we have identified as critical ones to incorporate into our work into the future, in order to kind of provide added value for learners, especially in this area of just transition. I wanted to begin kind of by talking about some key concepts of global citizenship education. Firstly, that I think fit very well with kind of the idea of just transition. The first one is to say that interconnectedness, this idea of interconnectedness is really, really important in global citizenship. Understanding that all of the issues and challenges we face are very much interdependent and interconnected, and the idea then of the connection between local challenges and global challenges and vice versa. So what happens on a global level very much affects us on a local level, and the opposite is true to say as well, I think, and there's many examples of that. The other thing from GCE, I will abbreviate it to speed things up a little bit, is that it's very much a values laden approach. It's not neutral. We're not neutral in terms of our delivery on our approach, and there are values, and those values kind of connect very much with social justice, equity, sustainability, and I think that's quite compatible with this idea of just transition. And then the final kind of thing to say on this is that GCE explores things from a root cause approach, and this is really crucial to understand as well. It's not necessarily waiting for the problems to happen and identifying the right bandage for this problem. It's trying to anticipate and identify these problems and looking at what's happening kind of underneath the roots. what's happening underneath the roots of the tree that we can kind of investigate, critically analyze, and come up with solutions and tackle accordingly. So that's kind of just framing kind of, I suppose, development perspectives approach in terms of GCE. Specific kind of competencies in relation to GEE, we would look at things in terms of 4 pillars. The first one, there's no specific order really to this. They're all equally important. One of them then is critical thinking. It's this ability to look at issues, analyze these issues that are very, very complex. Climate change and tackling it is complex. It's not straightforward. It's not easy. Identifying misinformation is not straightforward. It's quite a challenging thing to do. So looking at these areas from a critical lens is key. So developing critical thinking skills within our learners is really probably the first step in terms of any long-term engagement we have with participants and organizations. So with that, then problem solving, and I've seen that mentioned in your presentation, and Kaliki. Yeah, identifying these root causes of problems and coming up with ways to tackle it. I won't go over too much again because I did mention it earlier on, and finding innovative but very, very importantly equitable solutions. And the equitable solutions are key in terms of just transition, because when we're tackling things, if we look at some examples, say for tackling, climate change or reducing our emissions, certainly from the point of view from the Irish government, many of them do result in reduced emissions, but sometimes they affect the lowest socioeconomic kind of parts of society more adversely than, say, other parts of society. So it's important that solutions bring everyone along on the journey, and we're making sure that the solutions aren't hurting the least well off in society more adversely. I mean, this is really crucial from a just transition point of view. I spoke about interconnectedness, so we try to develop kind of system thinking skills and competencies within our learners, trying to kind of engender this idea that everything is so connected and we can't approach problems in a linear fashion, or tackle the secondary causes of these problems. We have to tackle them at their roots, but we have to understand what the consequences are of these interventions, say. Some of the consequences can be positive, but maybe not all the time. And it's just understanding through systems thinking that, every action has a reaction of some sort. And then I suppose I did say that these 4 pillars aren't all equal, but maybe my biases are showing that this last one I'll speak about is key. It's this idea of active citizenship. We can and do sometimes get into a rut of problematizing the issues, speaking about them, talking about them, trying to understand them a little bit better, trying to think of every possible kind of pitfall of an action that we might try. But I think it speaks to the spirit of what Amy said in terms of experimentation. We have to do something. We can't speak about the problems all the time without actually taking action, because without action, nothing will happen, nothing will change, and the problems will still be there. So active citizenship is such a crucial kind of competence within kind of the GCE framework. And then we look at the evolving landscape, and in the world of 2025, things are happening really fast. Information is transmitted very, very fast, and very often misinformation or disinformation is what's transmitted to people. So storytelling is a really key kind of skill set. It's not just one skill. It's a combination of skills, but it's something that we use a lot, and it's such an important kind of skill set to bring to learners. In terms of giving them those critical thinking skills, also to identify misinformation and disinformation. Um, we live probably in a world, and I think we just have to look at some of the kind of recent things that have happened politically, maybe starting from Brexit, the rise of kind of Donald Trump and some kind of other kind of more right-wing political kind of movements. And this idea of, to me, to me, nuance is dying in the world, unfortunately, because sloganistic politics is what seems to be sadly winning the day in many cases. So this idea, get Brexit done, 3 words, something I completely disagree with, but impactful, powerful, punchy, um, good job from a storytelling point of view. Make America great again. These slogans are very simplistic, and don't look at nuance. So it's a question I don't have the answer to, but I mean, I'm sure there's far more intelligent people on this call and elsewhere that can maybe answer. But how do we make nuance sexy? How do we make it? How can we use storytelling to kind of highlight these nuances, without kind of looking like we're standing at a podium preaching to people, because we have to bring people along, from a just transition point of view. We have to bring people along to tackle issues like climate change. It's so crucial. So it's not a question I have the answer to, but it is an open question. But I think storytelling is the answer. And also kind of connected to that a little bit, recognizing that despite some of my fears, AI is something that's here to stay. It's not going anywhere, and in fact, it's going to play a more significant role in our lives from what I can see. So, how as educators, how as learners, how as individuals, how as communities, what can we do to upskill ourselves and learn about things like prompt engineering and use AI like any tool. It's a tool that can be used for malevolent or benevolent purposes, and hopefully we can find ways to use it from benevolent purposes, or at least I think so, to help us kind of engage with our learners or engage with communities further. In terms of then, the future, having like this idea of futures thinking, the ability to kind of anticipate and plan for future scenarios. Again, speaking to that root cause approach that GCE uses, not waiting for the problems to emerge, but trying to anticipate them. This is going to be something that's crucial for communities going forward. And again, connected a little bit with that, but also connected with storytelling, this idea of language. I mean, we speak about growth, and in most cases, globally, growth is really measured by GDP. It's such a crude way of uh, measurement of societies and of our environment as well. And there's huge blind spots to this measurement. Yet it's predominant language in media, even in our own discourses. Sadly, it is what we tend to mean when we talk about growth with groups. But I think we have to try and reclaim that language. And again, within our work, we look a lot of other theories of development, other stories. The most powerful story at the minute is this one of growth as measured by GDP. But really, the power of a story is not whether it's true; it's whether it's believed. And this is probably the most widely held belief in society. So how do we kind of change that a little bit? And I think through GCE and Just Transition, we are beginning to change that language. And the more people we can kind of engage with that, the better. I suppose then kind of drilling down into maybe some specific skills for communities, for individuals, for organizations, that we're starting to observe as important would be um, mediation, mediation and peace building, um, and this idea of peace, for example, um, the behaviors and actions, say, of governments of nations, they're in their value sets, they talk a lot about peace, but as Amy's quite rightly pointed out, sometimes there's not a values coherence in terms of the behaviors. So the language of so the language peace is talking about in the context of security, building walls, um, arming oneself, and arguably, I would say that is in conflict with an idea of peace. So, how are we building sustainable pieces so that communities can work together, communities can collaborate, so that there's less war and we know the resulting problems that go along with that. And this idea of mediation is crucial, and also then in terms of bringing people um along in this journey of just transition, because to reduce emissions, to improve societies, we will at some point have to work with people that we don't agree with, or that we disagree with very, very strongly. So how do we bring them together? Not to an extent that they 100% agree with us, but how do we engage with them in some sort of respectful manner that we can begin to build progress here? And very often, and it's a trap sometimes we fall into, we work within our circles of people that think along the same line, but possibly, arguably, we need to get out of these circles sometimes. Um, yeah. So that kind of relates to building empathy and understanding. And one really practical skill then, and it's going to become more crucial, especially in the context of what we're seeing with the floods in Spain earlier this year. I know last year in Ireland we had some terrible floods down in Cork, and actually in my own locality, which I've never seen before, we have the wildfires in Australia, in Los Angeles. This idea of communities building their skills around sustainable living is going to be very, very crucial. Um, how many people can grow their own food? How many people have their own supply of even grey water, should they need it, should they run out? Little things like this, I think from a practical point of view are very, very important. Um, and I suppose with all that, I'd finish by talking about maybe some of the attitudes. One of them is humility, as Amy said. We all have so many blind spots. We all bring some very valid knowledge and experience to the table, but in the totality of everything, it's very little. So we have to have that humility to question ourselves sometimes and be open to the fact that we might be wrong. I mean, 500 years ago, it was taken as knowledge that the earth was flat. It's, we know it's not. So knowledge changes, and we have to have that humility and openness to consider that, I might be wrong about something, that maybe I need to learn from someone else's perspective. And that's how things change within communities. Because we're not an island. Again, as Amy said, we can't do this on our own. Um, and we gotta build our resilience skills, our skills of resilience, because this isn't easy. This isn't easy. The challenges we face are many, and sometimes they feel like they're too high a wall to overcome. But as educators, as learners, we have to have that resilience, because if we don't have that resilience, how can we bring people along for the ride? How can we ensure that our futures, but other people's futures, because we are just kind of custodians of this planet at the minute. But how do we ensure that there's a future for the next generations? And with that, leadership is just so important. So there's a lot in that. The competencies are wide and varied. You don't have to be 10 out of 10 in all of them or half
Absolutely.
of them. But I think, again, to kind of speak to what Amy said, it's a journey. It's a journey. It's something that we can all try and move towards and do better. And it's the only way it's going to work. Not being afraid to be wrong, not being afraid to put ourselves out there, because yeah, without action, nothing really will change or be different.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
kind of taking a little meander through there. So happy to answer any questions around that.
Lovely. Thank you so much. And I think so many things relate to both what Amy said, but also to what we will discuss with Almudena. And uh, I'm standing into what both of you said about the voices that are heard and the voices that are missing. And also, when talking about equitable solution, how everybody should be included. And I think that this is very prevalent when we're talking about rural areas and people in rural areas, especially in the parts of Europe where we don't have the flat central Europe, that even though you're in a smaller city, you have more or less access to everything. But coming from example from Greece, I can really tell you that living in an island and living in like in the center of the country is nothing to be compared like in itself as being like the same country and the same status. And factors like the GDP will not show that because they will take an average and they will see into an average. I think that we'll have a lot of very interesting things to discuss now with Almudena, and maybe also for community living, because when we're talking about growing your own food or doing things like by yourself, I think that in rural areas we have a lot of wealth to look at and to learn from, not only teach to when considering like competencies in this context. So with that, and opening up the chat for any questions, I will go towards our last speaker before opening the full Q&A, Almudena. So Almudena works in the Technological Center for Furniture and Wood of the region of Murcia since 2015 as a project manager and a professor at the University of Oberta de Catalunya. She has extensive knowledge in R&D national and international projects related to innovation, business models, and entrepreneurship for more than 15 years. And at the moment, she's coordinating the ESF Plus project, New EcoSmart, relating to twin transition in rural areas. And on that, Almudena will welcome you, and we would like you to share with us some insights from New EcoSmart in this concept of sustainability in a community context. So, yeah, welcome, and we're happy to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Angelique, for inviting to me today for this webinar, and also for having the pleasure to be with Paul and Amy in this interesting discussion. Before, let's say, enter more in detail about the connection of New EcoSmart and their insights and just transition, I would like to start explaining a little bit what is New EcoSmart. As you already mentioned, this is a European Social Fund project that was funded by the Horizon Europe and European Commission in 2023. We are almost, let's say, in the last part of the project, because the project will end this July. And generally speaking, this project has the objective of trying to revise rural areas and trying to empower specifically the targets of adult plus 45 years old, and also SMEs or micro firms through social innovation, but also toward the green and digital transition. First of all, maybe what are you thinking is why you choose, or why the consortium choose this target of adult plus 45 and the rural areas? Well, Basically, it's because, as Angelique mentioned before, it's not designed to be to live in a rural area than to be in a city. You don't need to be in big cities like Rome, Paris, and Madrid, or whatever, but just in a small city, let's say about 200,000 inhabitants or something like that, you have a lot of possibilities in terms of connections, in terms of training, different organizations, NGOs, etc. However, when you go for rural areas, we see that there is a lack of, let's say, for example, lack of internet connection. The connection, the infrastructure is quite limited. So when they want to survive, when they want to try to develop their businesses and to work with different aspects of industry, material, etc., they need to be updated with these two main topics that are the green and the digital transition. Also, we identify before starting the project and submitting the proposal that specifically the adult plus 45, when you talk with them, with some of them, and you ask for them, what is for you digital transition? They only maybe answer to you that is just to have, let's say, a smartphone and to connect to internet, but they don't go deeply on the topic. The same problem or the same inconvenience we have found on the sense of green topic, sustainability. Maybe for them, for some of them, the most answer was for me, sustainability is to recycle, to use the 3 or 4 bins and to put the proper paper in the blue one or whatever. So when they want to apply this kind of concept to the industry, to the work, they are quite limited. So our idea on that sense is to try to revive these rural areas with a training project as New EcoSmart. Regarding the areas that we are working on in the project, we are working in the center of Portugal with 2 organizations, in the southeast of Spain, in the region of Murcia, where my organization is located, and also in the south of Italy, in Pacentro area. These 3 areas are the 3 rural areas that we have identified and in which in the areas that we are implementing our piloting and our training material. So basically, the difference material that we have identified interesting for the people are mock platform, that offer for them a flexible, high quality training, but also an open training on the sense that they don't need to follow an instructor or to be attending classes every day, because we know that most of them are working and also some of them has another needs. So in order to allow them this flexibility, we develop a mock platform that support them in sustainability concept, digital concept, but also in entrepreneurship and another soft skill. Because in relation with the comments and the intervention of Amy and Paul, these transversal skills are fundamental. The same for the entrepreneurship. Some of their parents, maybe they work on the agricultural sector, but they are seeing that they could go a step further to develop a small shop or to develop maybe even though an online company. But for that, they need, apart the digital part, also this entrepreneurship and soft skill of management, also digital literacy, etc. So we are trying to give to them through this mock all these training pillars. The second one is a micro-learning tool, an app for the mobile phone, because other of our identification and insight from the project is that even in rural areas, everyone is well connected through the mobile phone. Everyone, let's say, it's a little bit dependent of the mobile phone, and some of the people don't want to go for a mocking or something that maybe require more a computer, but they prefer to go for a small question, quick question, and maybe 2 or 3 per day. So based on that sense, also we have identified these needs, and we created a microlearning tool specifically for digital skills. So basically, that are the toolkits and the information that we have created to let's say, to promote the competencies and to try to go further with this twin digital and green transition. But apart from that, one of our main pillar, apart from training, is the creation of an ecosystem to expand our ecosystem, inviting new stakeholders, social innovation communities, etc. How we have developed and also boost this expansion of the new EcoSmart ecosystem? Well, we have created two activities. The first one was what we call a hackathon. That was an event of 3 days where we promote the integration of some teams and to prepare and suggest some ideas for solve challenges to solve this lack of knowledge in rural areas. There was like around 15 groups that they were working in order to solve these challenges and to provide any kind of solution for rural areas. It was an amazing experience because they suggest to us so many different things, most of them complementary theories, but at the end it was like the real insight was that there is a lot of point of view, different views and different approaches to try to engage more stakeholders, to engage rural areas, and to achieve at the end better competencies for anyone in rural areas, but also in other regions. And the second activity that we performed was an open call where we gave, because we are in the middle of this implementation, 3 grants of around 20,000 euros for trying to implement new solutions out of our projects for this piloting and rural areas in Spain, Portugal, and Italy. So basically, what I could say is that in terms of sustainability and also in terms of upskilling and promote competencies, New EcoSmart emphasizes this awareness of digital and green skill, and this is directly supported the young transition because in general, let's say, in general speaking, we are equipping individuals and organizations to thrive in a sustainable economy. At the same time, we are trying to targeting vulnerable groups in rural areas, as I mentioned, with this 45 plus adult, but also we are welcome to any kind of person, vulnerable groups, etc. Also, I have to say that, for example, in our pilot, we have a request from the town hall of also including younger or teenagers that they don't work, or even though they are not students. So we are covering these nets to try to support them also because they are quite vulnerable. But we consider that for going for this young transition, equity and inclusivity, we need also to target them. And what's more, for our connection of New EcoSmart with Just Transition, let's say that we are trying to strengthen this community resilience because we are preparing individuals, but also the organization, that companies that are in rural areas, because for this shift of sustainable future, we consider that it's necessary to advocate and promote as individuals, but also organization, companies, etc. And just before closing my intervention, I would like to summarize these two findings, the most important to find it of our project related to just transition. And the first one is this critical role of digital and green skill development. We have identified that there are training programs that integrate these competencies, mainly in cities, but what we identify is that there are several communities without this any kind of training program. So on that sense, if we want to do and promote this just transition, we need to include and ensure inclusivity. So on that sense, working on digital and green skill for all in any place and in for any profile, it's quite important. For that sense, also we, as I mentioned before, we are working with local authorities because it's quite important for us that their policies prioritize this funding of skill building for and in their for any kind of target group, but especially for the vulnerable ones. And the second conclusion, to sum up a little bit my intervention, is that our project is our project extracted the conclusion that community-led innovation drive always and have always great impact, on the sense that we identify that it's quite important to work with training organization, with NGOs, directly with citizens, but also with policymakers, the community, the integration of everyone, allow and enable an active voice and support better for the sustainable transition. So in general, just to conclude, let's say that from my point of view, adaptability and the power of communities is the solution for going for just transition at the same time that we train people.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Almudena, and thank you for also mentioning a very key element for like envisaging future in any case, and that is finding funding and surviving, which is very important for everybody, especially the communities with which we're working. And I am reminded because before joining the AA, I was working at an organization in Greece, working mainly in rural areas, and I remember as you said that sometimes we take so much for granted, and it doesn't have to do with capacity, it doesn't have to do with possibility, but it has to do with access, and especially now with so much access on a mobile phone, but not taking the time to actually use digital media, then we come back to identifying misinformation and disinformation. And this is an essential point that is transferred also into the entrepreneurial mindset with scams, with fears of falling into, for example, greenwashing schemes. We've had that in many countries for through like schemes that fund ecological opportunities or ecological enterprises, and then you see that in the end, because there isn't this training or this familiarity with what this green competence actually means and the green mindset actually means, we fall into more predatory, let's say, behaviors from systems that have taken place. So it's really positive, and it's really essential that we strive for funding towards these activities that equitably consider the elements that we have discussed today. So we don't have a long time. We only have like 15 minutes left, I'm afraid, for today. I am going to open the floor to anyone that might wish to write a question in the chat, or maybe open their mics and ask a question now. So we won't bite. So if you'd like to ask something, I know Friday morning, middle of January, as Paul said, not probably the easiest. I'm keeping the chat open. I have a question on my own, maybe to ask, because I have to say this has been extremely interesting, but constantly and maybe taking under consideration the work that we're currently doing on a project we're running on enhancing learning voices, and having all these talks with them. And in those talks, we have something that we now call "we need to talk about it," and they are concepts that people brought forward, although we were just talking about the voice of the learner, and concepts like poverty, the economy, migration, war, gender came forth, sustainability, environment, and the intersection of all of them. So when we're discussing competencies for the future and competencies for a just future, for a future that has achieved or can achieve this just transition, I'd like to ask you, like, which future would you say we're talking about? Is the future that we're talking about something that is far away, or is the future that we're talking about tomorrow? Because that also connects to what we said, that everything moves so fast. So can we see a future as something like far away, or is it coming now? And I don't know which one of you would like to maybe comment on that, if you have any thoughts. Yes, Paul.
I'll keep it kind of as succinct as I can, just to allow others in. It's a very philosophical question in a way, you know, but I think it's actually quite crucial that the future isn't viewed as some kind of abstract, kind of distant, far away. Quite simply because the challenges that require our attention and actions need it now. There's an analogy that I won't assume everyone knows of. You know, if you put a frog into boiling water, it'll realize it's in boiling water and it'll jump out in a panic. But if you put a frog into cold water and heat that water up, it won't realize and it'll die in the water. And that's kind of almost where I see us with issues, especially like climate, is that we're the frog in the water that's probably now not cold, it's getting lukewarm, but we're still thinking, oh, this is all right. This is nice, actually. I mean, Ireland, sometimes everyone's like, when we've got like record heat, it's like, this is great. I don't need to go on holiday, or I don't need to do whatever. But I mean, Ireland, twice in the last 10 years has suffered drought. Yes, Ireland, where everybody stereotypes me as, oh, you live in Ireland, it rains all the time. It does rain a lot, for sure, because I mentioned flooding as well, but we have had drought. So these problems are starting to happen now and starting to manifest in a more extreme level in places like Ireland. But unfortunately for other places in the world, they have been happening at that extreme level for a longer time before. And if you ask someone who lives in the Pacific Islands, for example, there is a real existential fear that their islands will not be habitable anymore, because they will be more or less underwater. So we really have to view the future as something that's happening now. But with that comes a power of us all, because we have the ability to create and shape it. So it's not all bad.
Good, lovely. Almudena, I see that you've opened your mic. Would you like to comment on
Well,
it as well?
I really agree with Paul's, on the sense that when we are not talking maybe about future, is our today, our real society, our real problems. I also think that people used to think that problems are not happening to them until they arrive. For example, he mentioned also before the floods in Valencia. No one were worried about that, but after this disaster, because it's a completely disaster, policymakers, citizens are starting being aware of the green and sustainability problem that we have. So basically, I think that the most important for the future is to have competencies about adaptability, cooperation, and also creativity, because probably different problems in terms of technology, environmental, or even social changes and challenges will arise. So we need to be ready. and we don't know if it will be tomorrow, in 2 years, or maybe in 10. So I think that the key here is to be adaptable and to be collaborative with the different stakeholders.
Lovely. Amy, I see a mic opening. So
Yeah, no,
go
just
ahead.
very quickly, I wanted to say I agree as well. I think it's not a fixed point in the future, but it's a continuum which starts tomorrow. And that also, when we talk about the just transition, ultimately it's not a destination. It's also about the process and how we get there. And the future, I don't see it just as a time frame, but it's also a vision. It's about a shared vision. Yeah, it's about starting like Dan Paul said, starting now, to really prepare, to try, to experiment, to take action.
Absolutely. I think that with this call to action and this kind of the future is now, because as you said, Amy, it's a continuum that is starting tomorrow. I think we keep that and we keep the power that we have if we start taking action, as we said, and if we start perceiving ourselves as truly adaptable. We can adapt. We have been adapting. We just have to start it. We have to critically get into actually doing it and into actually coming forth. And so with that, I will thank you all for being here today. I see we don't have a question in the chat. We just have some very nice comments about the discussion and how interesting it is and the excellent practical examples. So with that, I want to say that, of course, as always, in 1 week, we will also share with you the recording, key resources, some presentations from our speakers, so that if you don't have the time to rewatch this webinar, if you've already been here with us, you can just see some presentations or download the transcripts or whatever we will have in place for you in a week's time. So thank you, everybody, for being here, and have a nice weekend, actually. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Angelica.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
For this kind moderation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.